Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great, thanks.
So I'm Sarah Posner. I'm senior editor at Religion Dispatches, and with me today, continuing the trend of having only people named Sarah on my show, is Sarah Pulliam Bailey. She's online editor for Christianity Today, and she also covers politics for the magazine. And we're going to start out talking about something that has basically exploded in the news, which is the Coney 12 video by the nonprofit group Invisible Children. And I won't give a lot of background there because I think that unless you've been living in a cave, you've probably heard about this. So I think that the interesting question in all of this, I mean, there's been a lot of pro and con for the video. And the pro has basically been great to raise awareness about one of the world's most wanted war criminals. And the cons have ranged from everything from the group seeking publicity or seeking fundraising to criticism that the documentation of Coney's whereabouts was outdated, to it gives a erroneous picture of what's actually happening in Uganda at the moment, to it ignores the resource wars that are going on in that part of the world, particularly in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And there was even one criticism that the video could spark retaliation by Coney's group, the Lord's Resistance Army. So what's been your, read on this whole thing? I mean, do you have a sense of whether good, bad, and different?
So I think, what a lot of people are commenting on is just how amazing this is for social media. I can bet you a bunch of mission agencies or nonprofits are saying, well, now we need to make these 30-minute videos about our, particular issue because, maybe they'll go viral. So I think a lot of groups will probably look at the strategy.
As of this morning, there were 73 million views of the video. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's incredible.
Which is amazing.
I think especially expecting people to watch 30 minutes of, some person in Africa that it's amazing to see how riled up people have gotten and changed their Facebook profile pictures to this man's picture, things like that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how, say, evangelical organizations or even if they're whatever religious or non-religious groups, whether they're going to change their strategies to focus on the awareness aspect. I think one of the big questions right now is it in and of itself, is awareness good enough? Some of the jokes going around about, stop criticizing invisible children. At least they're making everybody aware. Well, what do you do with that awareness? What then do you, is that really the best strategy, or, is simplifying such a complex issue really problematic in the end? So.
Right. I mean, one of the criticisms, in addition to the criticisms I laid out at the outset, is that it plays on people's emotions without setting out a real viable solution to the problem. I mean, obviously, Coney's been indicted for war crimes. He's, the subject of an international manhunt, I guess, maybe. I mean, but these problems, these conflicts around the world that involve, in the case of this region of Africa, conflicts over very lucrative natural resources, which has been a huge issue in Congo and, in the neighboring countries to Congo. These are huge, huge problems that most people can't wrap their minds around. And while, yes, it's true that playing on people's emotions, everyone's going to have an emotional reaction to this horrible warlord who kidnaps children and puts girls into sex slavery and cuts off people's limbs and lips and noses. I mean, it's horrible and unimaginable. And but there's, I think, a difference between generating an emotional reaction from people to, wear a bracelet or change their Facebook profile picture, and actually being able to do something about these sorts of conflicts. And I think President Obama was asked about it in his press conference last week, and I think he kind of laid out the difficulties that the international community faces in addressing these things. And I think from the standpoint of Ugandans, there was the Ugandan journalist whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, who did that, I think, widely watched video where she discussed that it didn't really depict what was actually going on in Uganda at the moment, and that Uganda has a lot of problems, social problems, economic problems, that people there are trying to resolve, that this kind of it portrays Uganda as being in a state of war, and her objection was that it's not in a state of war, but we do have a lot of other issues here.
Sure.
Rosebell Kagmeyer. Yeah, that was her name.
Well, so, Sarah, if I can jump in here, what I thought was interesting was sort of the video's kind of call to action was target a bunch of celebrities, like Tim Tebow and Rick Warren were one, among them, of, the religious people among the celebrities. So, and then target policymakers to, go in and help the Ugandan army catch this man. So what was interesting is they recognize, obviously, this celebrity impact in getting them around their issue, but also the emphasis on policy and, as long as we target these individuals, then we will eradicate child soldiers everywhere. It just seemed like it was simplifying, again, the complex issue, but also looking to policy as a way to fix the solution, which I thought was a little, that was interesting to me, but also somewhat problematic to say, if we only get the people in Washington to get behind this issue, then, we will solve all the problems in Africa. Did you see that, as problematic, or did you pick that up?
I think that was part of the point that was being made by Kagmeyer, if I'm pronouncing her name right, and some of the other Ugandan bloggers and journalists who had discussed it online. I mean, I think that there's sort of this split between, it's great to raise awareness of the fact that there's this sort of thing that's happening there, but then on the other hand, Ugandans are working hard on their own issues that are facing their society right now, and we think that we can resolve some of these issues that we're having that you're ignoring in this video. You're trying to make it seem like we're in this war-torn country, and we're not, and we're trying to address some of our own internal problems, and now you're saying that celebrities and Washington policymakers have to get involved in that. So it's so complicated. It's so, fraught, because on the one hand you can see, yes, sure, raising awareness is a good thing, but then you always want to see raising awareness coupled with do something. Yeah. But then the question is, what should the do something be? But I just thought, I'm also fascinated by just the social media aspect of this. How does a video go viral like that?
Do you think?
Do you think that they had a particular set of production values or messages or networks that enabled that to happen? Like, dissecting how the going viral happened, I think, is another fascinating aspect of this.
Well, so this is, this isn't scientific or anything, but among my friends, I thought it was hilarious to see 20 of my friends post this video, and then 20 of my friends post, wait, Invisible Children, is X, or, they posted the Visible Children Tumblr blog that was in response to the video. So I wonder if part of the viral factor was the fact that Invisible Children itself was controversial, because so many people were posting the video, but then so many people were saying, wait a second. And so it had this feeling of, I need to watch this now so I can form my own opinion about these issues. And I think people do recognize that these are important issues. They're complex. There are a lot of things to consider. And so I think honestly, the controversy around Invisible Children only helped the viral nature of the video.
Do you think that was deliberate?
Do I what?
do you think it was deliberate that they made something controversial so that it would generate more interest in what they were trying to say?
Well, I don't think they thought people would react against their own organization and say, oh, it's not transparent enough. Oh, we need to look at their money where they're, I would be surprised if they thought, oh, because we're a controversial organization, it's going to go so viral. But I think it ended up helping, if you will, the viral nature. Now, what I do worry about or wonder is whether people will be so turned off by or paralyzed by thinking, oh no, all these good causes, what if the organization isn't, good enough or has this underlying, they're just fundraising, or when you start to question the motives, you start to paralyze people, who initially watched the video and said, oh, that, I can, something clear, something obvious I can rally around. You saw that with AIDS, it was so obvious.
And you saw that
with
the Greg Mortensen book too, the book of
3 Cups of Tea.
3 Cups of Tea.
Yes. Right. So you see examples of, unfortunate circumstances, or they're not transparent enough, or issues that, you really want. I mean, after Haiti, right? Like after Haiti, there was so much pouring out of support and love, and now we're seeing a lot of reports about how the money didn't get in, or people were corrupt and the money went to the wrong people, the wrong places. And so you're like, well, the next time a Haiti happens, you're going to be less likely to quickly donate because of social media or because it's the hip thing to do at the moment. So right. I'll be curious, as viral and as exciting and interesting and fascinating it was for social media, I wonder if it'll have some negative backlash because of it.
Right. Yeah, it's such a sort of fascinating meta story, almost, even apart from the questions surrounding the accuracy of what they portrayed about Coney in the video. Just the meta story itself and how it's, I've talked to kids in middle school who were, watching it surreptitiously in their bedrooms while their parents thought they went to sleep late at night, and were very motivated and moved by it. I mean, because I think that for, someone who's 13, 14 years old, it's probably extremely, it drives an extremely emotional reaction.
Yeah.
But then the question is, for kids who are watching it like that, what, are they getting an accurate picture of what's happening in Uganda? Are they getting, what are they taking away in terms of philanthropy or policy making or any of these questions? It's probably something we'll be talking about for a long time.
I know we were talking about Rush Limbaugh. Did you happen to see back in October, Rush Limbaugh had brought up this issue about Coney, and he said, so Obama, when the Obama administration did make an effort to capture Joseph Kony, Rush Limbaugh said that Obama was planning, quote, to wipe out Christians in Sudan, Uganda, because he was trying to. Did you see this?
Rush mistakenly thought that Kony was a Christian.
Yes, because of the Lord's Resistance Army, and Kony does have. Definitely, he's twisting religious texts, the Bible, Quran.
Right. He claims to be a Christian, but it's very
But so I think Rush Limbaugh, I think he sort of backtracked, but I think he can still find the comments on his website. So that's
right. I had totally forgotten about that. Yes, that's right. Rush Limbaugh, theologian,
yes,
and philanthropist. Well, something I wanted to talk to you about today was, Rush Limbaugh and the comments he made about Sandra Fluck on his show, which he's, semi-apologized for. And I think that there's been a lot of focus on, the presidential candidates and the questions surrounding whether they repudiated Limbaugh's comments in a forceful enough way. And now there are all these questions about the votes of women in November. Has the GOP turned women off with the politicking around the contraception issue? And further, have they even further turned women off by not rebuking more forcefully, or forcefully at all, Limbaugh's really ugly insults of Fluck on the air? And something that's fascinating, too, that I think that is getting kind of lost in that conversation is evangelical women because I think the focus tends to be on, well, what are independent women thinking? Because
Mhm.
the horse racers want to know, how is this going to impact the election?
Mhm.
But something that I'm curious about is how evangelical women are viewing Limbaugh now, if they even viewed him positively to begin with. I mean, it strikes me that he obviously has a big conservative audience, but does he have, I mean, there was something on the blog at Christianity Today, the hermeneutics blog, which is
Mhm.
written by women, which discussed this issue and his use of the term slut and prostitute and what that meant for evangelical women. And Rachel Held Evans has blogged about it.
Mhm.
And it seemed, I got the sense from reading those that um, evangelical women are really troubled by this.
I think they are, but I think the danger is letting Rush Limbaugh dominate the conversation. Because once you do that, you say, I mean, not only were his comments so clearly bizarre and wrong, and so many, well, I shouldn't say so many, it wasn't like there was a flood of evangelical negative reaction, but I think a lot of people were, who is he? But once you let Rush dominate the conversation, you're letting him distract from the issue that a lot of evangelicals women are concerned about, which is the contraception, the religious liberty element of the contraception debate. So I think if you look at, I think you cited in a recent article that 68% of evangelicals are against the Obama's ruling on contraception and having these religious organizations having them provide contraception to their employees either through their insurance. I think that evangelical women aren't necessarily going to be like, oh, Rush Limbaugh all of a sudden called someone a slut. I'm no longer going to, be against this ruling, or I'm no longer concerned about this. I'm concerned about how Rush is portraying someone. So I don't know that it's going to be big enough for evangelical women to say, oh, now the issue is actually about, this slut and how Rush Limbaugh is calling names, because it's kind of, to some extent, it's kind of like, well, what doesn't he say that's, concerning, or since when are we letting him drive the conversation? I don't know if you're saying the same thing.
So, right, well, what you were just referring to was the Pew poll that showed that something like 68% of evangelicals were against the contraception coverage requirement in the Affordable Care Act. And that was even a higher percentage than Catholics who were opposed to it, even though the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops had initially driven the discussion about this, even though ultimately evangelicals came on board with it. It was initially something that was being pushed by the bishops, and it was really about a Catholic opposition to contraception.
Right. What's funny about that is that evangelicals are not fundamentally opposed to contraception,
right.
Other than Plan B and kind of the emergency contraception. They aren't against birth control in the same way that the Catholic bishop, would say this is against our teaching. So I think what's unclear to me is that evangelical women, or even Catholic women, I'm not sure that they're going to say, oh, Rush Limbaugh has said this thing about this woman, therefore, I don't like the Republican Party anymore. I mean, maybe I just am not seeing that in the polls.
Yeah, but it's interesting though, because do you think that evangelical women would want to see someone like Rick Santorum or Mitt Romney take on Rush and say, look, I'm just as opposed to this coverage requirement as you are, but you've gone way too far with this language. I mean, do you think that because there's this ground in between where you can be opposed to the contraception coverage requirement, but still also be opposed to this really ugly, insulting rhetoric that's used by someone who really is a prominent figure in the conservative movement?
So I don't know that, say you're an evangelical woman and you're in Alabama or whatever, and you're trying to decide who to vote for. I don't think you're necessarily going to say, oh, Rick Santorum gave a harsher critique of Rush Limbaugh than Mitt Romney or what have you. I think this is going to fade. I think this rush is going to be taken out of the conversation, and we're, in theory, going to go back to the issue at hand, which is whether religious groups should have to provide through their insurers. So this could apply to self-insured religious agents groups, whether they're going to have to provide contraception to their employers. I think especially
right.
because, the bishops are they're still at this. They're, evangelical groups, they're still rallying together to figure out how to fight this, either in the courts or in the, through protests, things like that. I think we're going to still see this issue. I'm not sure that we're going to still be talking about Rush Limbaugh in 6 months.
Huh. It's interesting. So, because I think that there's two different framings here. One is there's a war that Republicans say there's a war on religion, mm-hmm. that Obama is waging a war on religion. Mm-hmm. And Democrats are saying, although President Obama hasn't said this, but the DCCC and the DNC mm-hmm. have used it either in fundraising or just in communications with supporters, that there's a war on women.
Yeah.
And I actually think that my perspective on it is that there's a war on or a war for the meaning of the First Amendment, because I actually mm-hmm. think that the whole discussion about whether there's a religious liberty issue at stake mm-hmm. in the contraception coverage requirement is one that showed us dueling concepts of what the First Amendment means, what the interplay between the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause is, and that the Democrats actually had court rulings on their side, which some of them discussed in the multiple hearings that the Republicans held on this issue, and that the Republicans were, I felt like, appealing to what they wish or hope or want the interplay between the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause to be. But I think that the question of the war on women, I think that's something that the Democrats think they're winning this question, because
do you think they are? I mean, are you seeing indications of that?
I think that there's people who think that people like me who think that even the original rule adequately protected religious liberty by exempting houses of worship, and that there should be the contraception coverage requirement. And then there are people who think that there should be like a further carving out of an exception, which is what Obama did. So that was like the Catholic Health Association.
Right. He won people over, but I think there are a lot of groups that are still upset that the exemption itself did not go far enough to include religious organizations that, have non-religious employees or serve non-religious people. So I think it sets a precedent for other cases to say only houses of worship are exempted from this thing. So I think there are still a lot of groups that are upset about how it was done, that the exemption wasn't widened, even when he said, okay, this is who is going to pay for contraception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I think that there's people who are not going to be moved out of their camp regardless of what happens here, right? So, but I think that the discussion has been about people, I don't want to say people in the middle, but people who maybe do not pay as much attention to these sorts of issues between elections. Right?
I think that's going to be the key. If you see this as a contraception issue, you're going to see it as a woman's, issue. But if you are hearing from your priest, or if you're hearing from your religious leader that this is, the government is going to force your, favorite charity or your favorite group to, do something against what they want to do, they're going to see it as a religious liberty issue. So I think, like you said, some people may not be as aware of the specifics of the issue. So it's kind of a question of messaging. That's why you'll see a lot of religious groups saying it's not about contraception necessarily. That complicates it, and that makes it even more, the reaction even more visceral and it deals with sexuality and all these other things and women's rights and things and what the government should be providing to people as part of healthcare. But I think in and of itself, a lot of groups are going to say it's not about contraception, it's about religious liberty, and we need to look at, how the government is, who are they saying needs to provide what, and whether it can, say these groups need to provide it or they face a fine.
Well, I think that there was an article in the Times over the weekend where they further interviewed people who had been respondents to a poll, and that, they found some women who, voted Republican or leaned Republican, who were considering abandoning the Republican Party, at least for this election cycle, because they felt like they were too focused on these questions of access to birth control. And these are the voters that pollsters and probably the campaigns are pondering over. People who are not, on the mailing list of organization that's taking this on from either direction, and how they are perceiving it. Are they perceiving it as a religious liberty issue, or are they perceiving it as a healthcare issue?
I think the thing with that New York Times article that you're citing is, I did read that article and I thought, maybe there's like this flood of women who were Republican or have voted Republican and now they're switching over or whatever. But I didn't see anything in that article that either cited polls, or I didn't feel like it was persuasive enough for me to say, this is definitely going to be a problem for the Republican Party come November or whatever, that they're all of a sudden going to see this flood of women abandoning the Republican Party, especially if Romney is the nominee. If Santorum was the nominee, maybe I'd say something different. But I think assuming Romney is going to pull through, maybe, but over this contraception issue, I don't necessarily see a flood of women leaving the Republican Party.
Well, I think that the Times article that we're talking about did say that this was anecdotal and not empirical.
Not
and I think that this is something that pollsters and others are trying to figure out. While you might see a poll, and we have seen polls that show women and independent women disapproving of the way the Republicans have approached this issue, I think that we haven't yet seen for sure, especially because opinions are going to change between now and November. And there's many things that are going to factor into somebody's vote.
We have a lot
but I think
more
that's what people are pondering over, and that's what that's what these dueling war messaging is about. Trying to present the most what's the right word? The most compelling argument against the other side. Is it an argument about religion, or is it an argument about healthcare?
Right. Well, the other thing is, if you think towards, November, there is a lot of disagreement in the pro-life movement over the personhood amendments, but I think we're going to see a bunch of ballots come November in different states over personhood and other pro-life issues. We saw this in Virginia with the ultrasound question. And so I think if the contraception debate gets linked to the abortion debate, I know you've written about this, but if people are saying, Obama is making these religious groups provide abortifacients, that could also impact the debate. If people make that connection, or if religious leaders are sending those messages. I could see that becoming an issue come November because of the other issues that could be on the ballot. What do you think about that?
So you're saying in a state where there's a personhood referendum on the ballot, that this could have an impact on the way people see? But I think it could be also the other way, because I think that people who are opposed... So just to be clear, so the personhood amendments, there are some pro-life activists who are opposed to the personhood amendments because they think that they're strategically not a good idea, because they would be an imperfect challenge to Roe. Like, they don't want to have a challenge to Roe that they would lose.
Well, there's other issues, because if you defined personhood as life beginning at conception, that could outlaw IVF. It could, you couldn't have abortion in cases of rape or incest, things like that. I think that a lot of pro-lifers say, no, that's too far. That's impossible. Nobody's going to get behind that. So I think it's more than just Roe v. Wade. I think there's a larger, do we really want to try to get the general public behind the idea that life begins at conception? Or is
that gets to this whole issue of the emergency contraception too, and the way this has played out in the contraception coverage debate, which is that Ella and Plan B are classified as emergency contraception by the FDA, but there are a lot of pro-lifers who say that they're abortifacients, but this is not how they're classified by the FDA, and so
right.
And
so,
and
but
so
that's
it goes
why
to
I
a
think
question
that
of how you, the whole issue of when you define the pregnancy. So, but that's like a theological question more than a scientific question, because the scientific community and the medical community has defined those two drugs as emergency contraception that work to prevent a pregnancy when taken within a certain period of time after unprotected sex.
But so I understand there are some distinctions within the medical community, but what I see is, say, religious leaders saying, we see this as abortifacients. We see this as problematic. Plan B, Ella, these things are against the pro-life. This isn't about contraception in the sense, birth control and being able to have access to that. And it's not about being barred from contraception. It's about, does the government, should they be able to say, religious group, Catholic Charities or whatever, you need to provide Ella or Plan B. I could see them rallying behind that and saying, they are forcing us to provide what they say, abortifacients, and connecting that to other pro-life issues in November. I could see that happening.
So you think that this could actually work to increase support for personhood referendum?
No, sorry. The reason I brought up personhood was I think that the pro-life issues are going to be a political issue in November. And so I think if they make all these connections, they could use it to kind of rally people to say, all these life issues are the reason you need to either be behind the Republican Party or Romney or whoever. I think they could use it as a kind of a combination of several issues that have to do with abortion, life ethics, things like that. That I think, right now it's being talked about as a woman's issue, but I think come November it could become more of a life ethics abortion issue.
So do you think that this could play a role like the role that same-sex marriage ballot measures were thought to have in 2004, which was to act as sort of get out the vote?
I mean, maybe I'm projecting too far, and maybe I'm overthinking this, but that I think I could see that as a possibility. What do you think? Do you think I'm thinking too hard about this?
I think it could work against the Republicans, because I think that the personhood measures, everybody knows that the personhood measure couldn't even pass in Mississippi. So I think that that's kind of been the yardstick that people have used. Well, if it can't pass in Mississippi, where is it going to pass? And that people do see it as so overbroad as to, so even if you're opposed to legal abortion, there are still people who think that it's overbroad in terms of potentially banning certain forms of IVF or other assisted reproductive technology and certain kinds of birth control. And so there are people who think that, and then there's also the issue of the exceptions for rape and incest. And so I think that for a lot of people, it could drive them the other way, because they say, well, this is an example of the Republicans going way too far with all of this reproductive stuff.
Now, what I didn't mean to connect, say, okay, so if Colorado passes the personhood amendment, then people are going to, vote Republican because they see this as one whole package. What I meant to bring up was I think that these personhood amendments and other amendments, that personhood one I brought up because I think it'll be a talking point come November. But I think life issues, abortion, things like that are going to be more of an issue than they have been during the primary. Because if you think about the Republican Party, Santorum, Romney, generally they agree on sort of these issues. But I think closer we get to the election, it'll be interesting to see if abortion plays more of a role. Now, it might not be because Romney may not want to, Romney, is probably going to want to focus on the economy, jobs, things like that. And especially because of his record on abortion, he may not want to, kind of allow that to be the issue or whatever. But I think come November, that the contraception thing could get wrapped up in some of the larger questions about abortion and women's health and things like that.
Well, speaking of Romney, let's talk a little bit about the primaries that are coming up in Alabama and Mississippi tomorrow.
Yeah.
So there's a new poll out this morning. I don't know if you'd had a chance to look at it. So it's from the sort of liberal-leaning public policy polling firm. Mm-hmm. And I was of course, I always look at the split among evangelical voters because that's the thing I'm sort of interested in. And in Alabama and Mississippi, there's something like 68% in Alabama and 70% in Mississippi of the likely Republican voters in tomorrow's primaries were evangelical. So they're a huge segment of the primary electorate there. And there's kind of a three-way split between the candidates. Romney was maybe a little bit more behind, running at like 28% versus Gingrich's 33%. Mm-hmm. But it's not this sort of fatal, all the evangelicals hate Romney sort of thing. I mean, it's, I think that there's this conventional wisdom that especially in the South, where anti-Mormonism runs higher than other parts of the country, or is thought to run higher than other parts of the country, that he would have, he just can't win over the Southern evangelicals.
I think what's interesting, and there's a graph on our politics blog at CT.
I saw that.
Yeah, wasn't it interesting that the higher percentage of evangelicals in a state, the harder time Romney has in those states. So there is some sense of like evangelicals not liking Romney now, whether that's due to his Mormonism. It's hard to tell because I think there's something in and of it. Like if Romney in and of himself, I think people just don't like him as a candidate. Like, they look back to his they say flip-flopping, or he's just not seen as kind of a culture warrior. He's not a messianic figure. He's not the candidate that I think they would have chosen. And whether that's due to, his Mormonism, I don't know how much of that is a factor. If people going into the polls say, oh, I couldn't vote for a Mormon, I can't bring myself. There may be part of that, but I think in and of itself, of the candidates, I think they see Santorum as someone who is going to, push their issue, take their agenda more than Romney would. I mean, right. I saw this. There's an Rachel Zoll at the AP. She did a piece on his Mormonism trying to attract voters in the South, and I thought it was interesting. He doesn't go into churches, right? And maybe he never has, but I felt like in 2008 he did more of an effort to specifically trying to reach out to evangelicals and religious voters, and he's just not even bothering this time around. So right. I wonder if that's part of it too. He's trying to get past it instead of, appealing to that. So,
well, it's interesting because I agree. You see the other candidates going and campaigning or at least making appearances at churches. And Romney hasn't done that at all.
It's crazy.
Hasn't made, a big effort either to just even, maybe not churches, but sort of religious-y groups, making campaign appearances. He just hasn't done it. I think that his campaign has concluded that focusing on the economy is his ticket, right? Mm-hmm. But I wonder if that's been a negative for him. For among evangelical voters, if he had done more of this religious stuff, it would have helped him, even if it was sort of religious-y Mormon stuff, because even though evangelicals are suspicious theologically, or some evangelicals are suspicious of the theology of Mormonism, the reality is that the Mormon church is very conservative on a lot of the issues that matter to conservative evangelicals.
I think I had wondered after Proposition 8, evangelicals kind of watching the backlash that the LDS church faced, whether they saw that and would say, oh, we can, rally together on these issues, or they saw the same kind of backlash that Rick Warren got, that these other groups got, and it's kind of like, can we stand together? I think, but, let's say Romney take, if Romney had Huckabee's personality, I wonder if he would just do better, if he had that sort of jovial, somewhat culture war,
but kind of that folksy thing.
Yeah, I wonder if he would just do better if he were a different person.
Well, there is a tradition in Mormonism of, giving your testimony and it being a very emotional thing and tears involved and so on, so that's not unlike a very sort of emotional testimony of an evangelical of, their salvation story or, and so I've always wondered why. So I wonder if it's a thing about Romney as opposed to about his religious tradition that has impaired his ability to be more human. I mean, that's a little bit the issue too. I mean, in addition to the unwillingness to play the culture warrior role, I think that there's also more of like that. There's the gut reaction issue for him.
Yeah,
but I think that's a reaction that liberals have about him too, that he's not human enough. So I think that it's an issue that he has that crosses many different demographics.
Right. Because if let's say we were to make this about theology and say, well, evangelicals just aren't theologically in line with Mormons, you could say the same thing about Santorum. Evangelicals and Catholics have not necessarily gotten along on theological issues, but I think especially in the last, couple of decades with, over Roe v. Wade or other issues, they've found common ground. Right. And so they are going to look at Santorum and not have a problem with his Roman Catholic faith because they're going to say, well, at least he's going to be our guy on, these issues or whatever. So I think if we were talking about theology, I think they would have the same kind of problems with Santorum, but they don't, obviously, because they're voting for him. So,
right. But, it's funny because when you look at the states that have exit polling, Romney was winning the Catholic vote.
Yes, exactly.
And Santorum was winning the evangelical vote. So it's just kind of, okay.
Yeah. Because I think it doesn't necessarily come down to faith or seeing this candidate and saying, oh, he shares my faith. It's more about priorities and, what do I see as the most important election issue right now? Is it about jobs, the economy, healthcare, things like that, especially when you think about Romney and healthcare. I think that's going to be a challenge, if he's the nominee, for him to convince conservatives, evangelicals, whoever is part of that, that he would overturn Obama and healthcare and those kinds of things. I think he's going to have those challenges because of his record.
Well, one thing that I was looking at in this poll that I mentioned a couple minutes ago was the high percentage of evangelicals in both Mississippi and Alabama who do not believe Obama is a Christian and in fact believe that he's a Muslim. And so it kind of struck me that whatever issues Romney may have with these voters, and let's set aside the specifics of Mississippi and Alabama because Obama's not going to win those states in the general election anyway. But whatever issues Romney has with conservative evangelicals over his own religion, it seems that there's, and this particular poll did not ask these voters what they thought of Romney's religion, so you're missing that data point. But it seems to me that for voters who either don't believe that President Obama is a Christian or actually falsely believe that he's a Muslim, that sort of seems like for a voter like that Romney's religion isn't really going to matter to them, is it? Yeah. I mean, because if they believe that
right, if they assume that Obama is a Muslim or whatever, they're not gonna necessarily be as concerned about Romney being a Mormon. Is that what you're trying to say?
Right, and I think that there's been some questions about not whether those voters would vote for Obama, but a question about the intensity level for Romney in the fall. There's been talk about, will these voters stay home just because they're dissatisfied with Romney? But I think that if you're motivated, as some voters I met on the campaign trail when I was covering primaries in South Carolina and Florida, who either didn't believe that Obama was a Christian or had questions about that or affirmatively believed that he was a Muslim, that even though they were for Gingrich or Santorum in the primary, they said, oh, no doubt I will vote for Romney.
Yeah, I think it'll be what I am interested to see or know is, again, assuming Romney pulls through and he's the nominee, whether he'll have an issue among independent voters or even Democratic voters over his faith. Because I've seen polls, I wish I had it in front of me, but I felt like Democratic-leaning voters had more of a, say, problem with Mormonism than even Republican voters did. And I wish I had that in front of me, but I felt like a couple months ago there was something
I think
on
it was
that.
a Pew poll, and I think that question, it raises different questions for different voters, and I think that for some very conservative evangelicals, these are theological issues that they have. And I think for liberals, it's less of a theological suspicion about Mormonism, but it's more about, the Mormon Church, that was the one that was involved in Proposition 8.
Right,
The
LDS
like Church
that.
is sort of secretive and patriarchal. And so I think the issues are less about, like, the theology differs from mine as opposed to the politics differ from mine. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow.
Definitely.
Well, listen, thanks a lot for doing this today.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right.